Good morning. Today is Wednesday, May 13th. God bless you. God is great and greatly to be praised. We thank God for another opportunity to gather together in His name, to teach His word. God is great and greatly to be praised. Good morning. Thank you for joining. We serve a great and awesome God. Good morning, Robert. I tagged you first thing to make sure that you was there. So I'm glad to see you there today. I learned how to do it before I actually go live. So I'm glad to see that you're there. You're one of the faithful ones to get on. We want to make sure that you have a chance to get on. Good morning, Valerie. Glad to see you there today. I see that you joined into that prayer last night with Pastor Renee Glenn. That was pretty awesome. That was pretty awesome. That's what we need. We need somebody that knows how to pray like that. And she was praying for the intercessors. She was praying for the gap dwellers. And that's what we need. We need to stand in the gap. We need to stay. We need to be strong. Good morning, Evangelist Brooks. Good morning, Sister Rice. Glad to see that you guys got a chance to get on. Let's go ahead right now and do our good morning, Sister Lewis. Glad to see you there too. Let's go ahead and do our devotions for today, which is May 13th. God's unfailing love extends to the most rebellious captives and afflicted fools, those who've cried out to Him in trouble. So these are the ones that God is saying that His unfailing love extends to us. The prayer is, my Savior, our Savior Jesus Christ. Your word says that greater love has no man than this, that He lay down His life for His friends. You have demonstrated the greatest act of friendship on our behalf ever. We praise You and we thank You for not treating us as our sins deserve or repaying us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is Your love for those who fear You. As far as the east is from the west, so far have You removed our transgression from us. That's found in Psalms 103, verses 10 to 12. Lord, You are good, and Your love endures forever. Your faithfulness continues through all generations, from Psalms 100, verse 5. So God bless you. Thank you guys for joining. Let's go ahead and open up with prayer. God, we thank You for this opportunity to gather together with Your people, God, to look in Your word. God, we've learned so much, God. We've learned the importance of prayer. We learned the importance of knowing who You are. We're learning the importance that you although You are long suffering, although You have patience, sometimes it runs out, Lord, and You do it for our good so that we may know You, God. We thank You that we've had an opportunity in looking at all these 24 chapters of Ezekiel, that we know You, God, and we thank You for that. Now, Lord, we ask that You let the words of my mouth, meditation of my heart be acceptable in Thy sight. Lord, You are our strength. You are our Redeemer. Good morning. Thank you all for joining. Let's go ahead and jump in here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I plan to do. So basically, today is going to be we're going to start looking now at God punishing the nations that were around Israel. Good morning, Sister Kennedy. Glad to see you have a chance to get on today. So we're going to look at the nations now. God is taking the attention off Israel. Yesterday was the last day that the attention was on Israel as far as her punishments. So yesterday, God said, I'm coming. And so the action started. So now the attention shifts now to all of the nations that are surrounding Israel. And so you can just look at a map, look at an Old Testament map. You can see all of those towns and cities and nations that surrounded Judah, surrounded Israel. And so God now is coming for them. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at chapter 25 and go through up to 32, but we won't go into detail. So today we're going to look at, I think, 25, one section of 20, and then we're going to do 26. We're going to skip 27. We're going to do 26. Then Monday, we're going to do 28 because it's very, very important. And then Tuesday and Wednesday, we're going to do 29 to 32. So that's how we're going to do. Hopefully you guys got that little outline so you'll know which direction I'm going in. So let's go ahead and jump in right now. I won't be reading all the descriptions and things. You guys have to read that for yourself. So I'm basically just going to give you the detail of it until we get over to 26. So the principle here is what God is doing, what God is saying, that if he judges, basically, if he judged his own people, then in justice, he's got to judge the nations that are around her for their sins too. So God is saying, I'm not just going to judge my people, I'm going to judge the people that are around my people, because they just sat back and watched and they didn't do anything and they didn't learn anything. So that's the idea right there. So let's look here at the first one. So the first one we see is Ammon, Ammon. She's found in Ezekiel chapter 25, verses 1 to 7. So this is the name of the nation. This place, Ammon, Ammon, is in, we want to see it in the map today, is in present day Jordan. So we know about Jordan. We hear about it. Good morning. Thank you for joining. So this is the first one that we're looking at. So the destruction of Jerusalem was punishment, but it was also a warning for those that were watching on the sidelines. So basically what God is saying, you see what I'm doing to my own people. So if I'm doing this to my own people, you got a chance to get yourself together. And if you don't, God is saying, I'm coming for you. So you either get right or you're going to get gone. That's basically what God is saying. So their position in that territory is they were east of the Jordan River. So we know the Jordan River, where the Jordan River was, because they had to cross the Jordan River to get into the promised land. So it was on the other side of the Jordan River. And in fact, they ran through Ammon before they actually got to the Jordan River. So now let's look more. So what was their crime? They laughed at Israel, they mocked it, and then their real crime was that they didn't have any pity for the sanctuary of God. That the fact that the God's sanctuary was being destroyed. They stole land when the Israelites were being sieged upon, and when they were being attacked, they crept up and they stole land. And then when Babylon came in to attack Judah, they stood on the side of Babylon because they figured that they would be safe if they stood on the side of Babylon. So that's what they did. And so they figured that they had a chance to take from them, because remember, when Israel came in, they took from them. So this was payback time as they were concerned. So basically what God shows here, that they were clapping their hands. It was like they were clapping like, yay, they are destroyed. We don't have to worry about them anymore. So they were clapping their hands. They expressed joy at the downfall of the people of God. So that was their crime. And so their punishment was that they would be conquered also by Babylon. And so the Babylon king, Nebuchadnezzar, once he finished with Israel, he turned to see who was next. And so he conquered them. He encamped against them. And the Bible says that they were remembered no more. So basically, if you looked at a map today, they are part of Jordan. You don't see Ammon anymore. They were basically absorbed right into Arab territory. So that's what happened with Ammon. And we see that in Ezekiel 25, verse 1 to 7. So those chapters are very short. Now let's look at Ezekiel 25, 8 to 11. And we're going to look at Moab. So Moab is further south. It's further south. We know about Moab because Moab comes from Lot's incestuous relationship with his daughters. And we also know about Moab because when there was a famine in the land, when there was a famine in Bethlehem, Naomi's and her husband and sons went down to Moab. And so that's where we meet Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite, and so she came from there. So that's why we know about them. So, of course, they were part of the history of David because of course, Ruth then marries Boaz, and then we got Jesse and all of those, and that's where David comes from. And so what did they do? They mocked Israel, and they said, well, Judah's not a big deal. They just like everybody else. There's nothing special about them. And so they were conquered and they were destroyed by the east, the enemy from the east, which is Babylon. Then the next one that we see is Edom. So the Edom, they were also east of the Jordan. So it looks like they were the Babylonians were coming from the east, and because that's where they were coming from, and they were attacking these territories that was in their pathway. So they were east of the Jordan. They were, of course, we know that they were brother to Judah through Esau. They were brother to Judah through Esau, and we can see that defined more in Obadiah chapter 1, verses 10 to 14. And because they were brother to Esau, they should have helped. But we saw in one instance where the Israelites had to get through, they were traveling through the wilderness. They were trying to get away from the Philistines, and they asked the Edomites to help them, and they wouldn't help them. And so that was also why God was coming against them. So, and again, we can see more about them outlined in Obadiah. That's one of the small minor prophets. And so then their punishment would be they're going to be stubble. There's nobody that's going to survive. You won't be able to find Edom in the map again. So if you want to learn more about them, go to the book of Obadiah. So basically God saying, I'm coming through. I'm getting ready to take all of you all out. The next one is the Philistines. So we see them in verses 15 to 17. So we all know about the Philistines. They had a whole old history of attacking Israel all the way back. And so the Philistine territory is more coastal. So if you looked at a map today, where Philistine would be what we call today the Gaza Strip. That's the Gaza. So we hear a lot about the Gaza Strip. And so that's where their territory would be. Good morning. Thank you for joining. We're looking at Ezekiel 25 and some of these smaller nations that God comes against after Israel is destroyed. So that's basically where you would find where Philistine was. And so the biggest thing that we know about them, of course, was that of course they were always a thorn in the side of Israel. They always attacked them. And so we know from the story of David that they attacked them. They had those giant brothers, Goliath, remember him? He was a Philistine. And so they were always out there baiting the people, attacking them. And that's when David came and he killed Goliath. And so that's the idea right there. And so Nebuchadnezzar came against the Philistines because they were trying to help Tyre, Tyre, which we're going to get into detail next. And so basically what happened with them was they were broken up. That whole territory of the Philistines was broken up, swallowed up by other nations. And so they don't exist anymore. You can't find Philistia on the map anymore. And so again, it's the place that we know of today as the Gaza Strip, if you wanted to know where they physically are. And then the other little nation, we find her over further in Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 20 to 26. So again, these are all these nations that God is coming against. Now, one of the things that I want to say too that is very interesting, what we see here is that these are 7 nations. And so I think, it's significance that the number of these nations that God is coming against now is 7. And so we know what the number 7 represents. It represents completeness. So it's 7 nations. One is Ammon, Moab, Edom, Philistia, Tyre, Sidon, Sidon, and then Egypt. And so Egypt would be the last one. And the interesting thing about Egypt is that 4 chapters are devoted to the destruction of Egypt. And so we're going to look at Egypt next week when we're going to look at chapter 28 Monday. And I'm going to tell you, no matter what you do, no matter how busy you are, you have got to be on to watch the teaching of Ezekiel 28. So we're going to do that Monday. And then Tuesday and Wednesday, we're going to finish up and do Egypt, because Egypt encompasses 4 chapters, and we know why right off the bat. So that's So that's all of those ones. And again, this one here, Sidon, would be considered the sister to Tyre because it was just 20 miles north of Tyre. They were basically in the same area. So it was a great city during Joshua's time. It was a city of riches. It was smaller than Tyre, but both of them were like twins because they were very rich. Sidon would be, if you look back in Genesis chapter 10, verse 15, you will see that Sidon was the name of one of Canaan's sons. And the interesting thing about Sidon is that Jezebel's father was the king of Sidon. So that's interesting right there. We all know who Jezebel is, right? So Jezebel's father was the king of Sidon, and Jezebel was the wife to Ahab, and she committed some of the worst crimes and curses against the Jews by bringing in all of that idolatry. And she was the biggest encourager of idolatry. And so that was their crime there. And of course, the judgment for them was that God was going to bring pestilence and disease to them. And so basically, God wiped them out with pestilence. God wiped them out with disease. So now I'm going to go up now to 26. I'm going to do that in a little bit more detail. Again, we're looking at the nations now that God is coming against after he finishes dealing with Israel, with his own people. Now he's dealing with all of the surrounding nations. So now we're going to look at Ezekiel chapter 26. Tyre is very important. We're going to look at 26 because it discusses how God dealt with them. We're not going to do 27 because 27 just gives a picture of what Tyre was. And so 26, 27, and 28 are all devoted to Tyre. But the most significant chapter is 28 because God is going to demonstrate the principality behind Tyre. So don't miss it. That will be Monday. So let's go ahead and look at this. I'm going to read some of the scriptures, but not all of them. So it starts out here that it came to pass in the 11th year on the first day of the month that the word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man, because Tyre has said against Jerusalem, aha. Remember I told you that she clapped her hands, she laughed. She is broken, who was the gateway of the people. Now she's turned over to me. I shall be filled. She is laid waste. So their idea was that the people of God, the city of God was destroyed. They were right there 20 miles away. They were close enough where they could go in and take the land, take anything that the Babylonians left behind. So that was the idea behind them. So they came against them. And so the first reason that God said, I'm going to take you out, Tyre, is because you started talking about my people. You're 20 miles away. You could have helped them, but instead of helping them, you decide that you're going to rob them. So God says, I'm going to come and I'm going to destroy you because you thought that you was going to benefit from the fall from somebody else. So God is saying, you're not going to benefit. Why? Because I'm going to bring her back one day, but look to me. You're not coming back, but my people are going to come back. So God is saying you're going to be punished because you're trying to benefit from the fall of the people of God. You thought that you could go in and you could ravish the land. That's number 2. Number 3, you thought that you would get rich off of her downfall. And number 4, you thought that you were going to take over. And God saying you're not going to take over nothing. You're not taking nothing. You're not going to rob nothing. You're not going to rape nothing. God is saying, I'm coming for you. So that's the idea. So this strong opposition here that Tyre had against Jerusalem wasn't always like that, because when you look at the history of Israel, specifically when David was king, we find that in 2 Samuel chapter 5, they helped David and they helped Solomon by providing them with supplies and expertise in building the temple. So if you go back and look in 1 Kings 5, 1 Chronicles 14, you will see that they gave them supplies, they gave them materials. But let me tell you right now, the friend today can be the enemy tomorrow. That's why we got to stick with God. That's why we got to stay focused to God. That's why we got to trust God. Yes, other people can help you and stuff like that, but when it comes time right down to it, those ride and die buddies that we claim that we got and stuff like that, they're going to ride away and leave you to die. Did you hear what I said? That's why we got to trust God. Yes, it's good to have friends. Yes, it's good to have neighbors and people like that, but you better trust God to be your ride and die buddy. Did you hear what I said? So that's the idea right there. And so Proverbs 17:5 puts a skirt on this by saying, he who is glad at the calamity of another will not go unpunished. So this was true of Tyre. So we got to be careful not to rejoice at the downfall of somebody else, because the day is going to come when they're going to be against you. So God here was against this nation because they were all for material riches, all for commercial prosperity. And so they rejoiced over others because of what they could take from them. Watch another nation, watch out for a nation, watch out for a country who only looks at other countries for what they can take from them. Did you hear what I said? They don't care about the other country. They want to take from them. That's the idea right there. So then verses 3-6, now we begin to look at the destruction of Tyre. So Lord, what's going to happen to them? We see that you're mad at them. You're upset with them. What's getting ready to happen? Therefore, again, that's that word, therefore. We know when we see therefore in the Bible, nothing good is going to follow after the word therefore. He says, behold, look, pay attention. I am against you. We don't want to hear that shout out there, Lord, please don't be against me. Please don't be against me. God opens up the box by saying, I'm against you, and I'm going to cause many nations to come against you as the sea causes its waves to come up, and they shall destroy the walls of Tyre and break down her towers. I will also scrape her dust from her and make her like the top of a rock. I will be a place for spread nets in the midst of the sea, for I have spoken, saith the Lord. It shall become plunder for the nations, and the daughters' villages which are in the field shall be slain by the sword. So let's look at these in details. This is what God is saying. Number one, God says, I'm against you. Number two, God says many nations are going to come against you. Number three, God is saying that they're going to break down your towers. God is saying they're going to come and scrape the dust off you. Number four, God says you're going to be treated like a rock. You're going to be like number five, you're going to be a place where fishermen spread their nets out. Then number six, God says your daughters' villages are going to be fields where slain people are going to die. So that's what God is saying. Number one, I'm against you. Number two, many nations are going to come against you. So God says that I'm going to send a wave of nations against you like a tsunami. So we know what a tsunami is. He says, I'm going to send a wave of nations against you. You think you're secure. You think you're safe. You think you're standing. You think you're strong, but you're going to fall, and you're going to fall hard. That's what God is saying. And he's really against them. Tyre. And we're going to see when we look at chapter 28 why he's so merciless against Tyre, because he knows the devil behind Tyre. That's why we're going to see that more in detail on Monday when we look at chapter 28. So God is saying you're not strong enough to stand up against what I'm getting ready to send you. So historically, let me tell you a little bit about what happened to Tyre. So basically, remember in one of those chapters, I don't remember which one, but God was talking about that he was going to set the stage, that it was going to be like a fork in the road. That Nebuchadnezzar is at the fork in the road. And so he's looking south and he's looking north. And so which way to go? God is driving him which way to go. So God drives him north. And so he goes north to attack Judah. But then after that's done, then God drives him south. And so Tyre is south. So basically, after Nebuchadnezzar is finished attacking Judah and everything, it turns its attention to Tyre. And it lays siege against Tyre for 13 years. And so it's basically trying to battle against them. And Tyre, the way Tyre is situated, is more like a coastal city. And so it was very difficult to get to them because they were a coastal city and they had basically the waters between them. And so Nebuchadnezzar tried to attack them for a good while. Eventually they were conquered though in 586. Just remember, Judah was conquered in 586. And so right after Nebuchadnezzar finished with Judah, they set their attentions on Tyre. And so they was against them from 586 BC up to 573 BC. But it took them all that time. And so they battled against them. They fought against them and everything. And so that's what happened. So they wasn't completely successful in destroying them. So then around 525 BC, the Persians came. And so they came here, and then they basically brought Tyre down, and they submitted to the Persians, but they still wasn't able to destroy them. Nebuchadnezzar set up a puppet king when they came in there because they couldn't get in, they couldn't do anything. So they set up a puppet king. Then when they got everything that they wanted to do, the Persians came in, and then after the Persians left, then Alexander the Great, who was from Greece, we know about him and his great conquest. He came in and he basically destroyed the city in 332 BC. And what he did was he built a causeway, because remember I told you they were a coastal city. He built a causeway, which meant that they could, they took the bricks and the rocks and everything that had been left behind from Nebuchadnezzar battering the city, and they took those stones and they built a road through the water, and they were able to get through the water and basically bring them down. So that's basically what happened. And then later on, Rome comes along, and then other cities that come along, and so they don't finally get destroyed until the 14th century. And actually, we find more about Tyre in the book of Matthew, because the Syrophoenician woman was from Tyre. That's the lady that came to Jesus that had the daughter that was vexed with demons. So that Tyre has a great history there. So let's go ahead and look at this in more detail. So you guys had a little bit of a history lesson. So they were permanently destroyed in the 14th century. So God let them lay around for a good while. So now let's look here what happened. So God's saying that you're going to be the top. You're going to be like a top of a rock where the fishermen are going to lay their nets out to dry. So it's funny how you end up being what you are, because the word Tyre means rock. So we talked here about the Nebuchadnezzar coming through, destroying them. So what does God say? So I gave you the background here. I gave you really more detail. So now let's look at what happened. He says here in verses 7 to 11, "For thus saith the Lord, behold, I will bring against Tyre from the north Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, king of kings," and this is small k, king of kings. He's coming with horses. He's coming with chariots. He's going to bring his horsemen, and he's going to bring an army with many people. He's going to slay with sword your daughters, the villages. So it gives that detail of what God's getting ready to do. God's getting ready to handle it. And so God is saying, look, pay attention. I'm coming for you. I'm sending Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the big bad wolf. Everybody shakes in their boots when Nebuchadnezzar comes. So God makes that promise that Nebuchadnezzar is going to come. He's going to bring, and so when it talks about dust coming, your walls shaking at the noise, wagons, chariots, all of those things coming. So we know that Nebuchadnezzar had a great army. It looked like dust, and you guys have seen those movies with the armies coming. It looks like dust on the ground. That's the idea right there. And so I already told you that Nebuchadnezzar laid a 13-year siege on them. And so basically, you can't imagine an enemy on the outside of you battering and coming against you for 13 years. 13 years. And so God forbid that we have to deal with this thing that we're dealing with for even 13 months. We can't even handle it for 13 days, for 13 weeks, for 13 months. But imagine somebody sieging you, battering against you outside, torturing you for 13 years. They were battered out there. They were bruised out there. They were buttressed out there. They were bullied out there. They were beaten out there. They were bothered out there for 13 years. That's what God is saying. So throughout this book here, of course, God, we all see God talk about Babylon coming against them. But this is the first instance where he actually names the king Nebuchadnezzar here in this case. So this is what comes against Tyre. So he turns his attention against Tyre, because remember what I talked about. He went against them for 13 years, but then we know what happened with him. Nebuchadnezzar basically went crazy, and you can see the story of Nebuchadnezzar over in the book of Daniel chapter 4. So we know about Nebuchadnezzar. He eventually had to move. He was against them for 13 years, set up that puppet, and then he went on about his business. But he went crazy out there. Remember about him, how he's the one that had the statue built. They was to bow to him. He had the dream and all of that stuff. And then eventually he went crazy. He was out in the field. He had nail claws. He had hair like an animal. And he went crazy. He went crazy out there. So God has a way to come against you when you come against his people. So he ate grass like an animal. He went crazy out there. So be careful. Be careful when you set yourself up to be God. When you want people to worship and bow to you, you're going to find yourself low to the ground. So he got so low that he was out in the field eating grass. So that's what happened right there. And so he ended up being destroyed. And so we see that more in detail, 12 to 14, a wave of them. So when we get to 12 to 14, it says here, they will plunder at your riches. They will pillage your merchandise. They will break down your walls. They will destroy your pleasant houses. They will lay your stones, your timber, and your soil in the midst of water. So I gave you that information earlier. But God now is giving a detail of it. He says, I will put an end to your songs. I will put an end to your music. I'll put an end to your joy. He says, I'm going to make you like a top of a rock. You're going to be a place for spread nets, and you shall never be rebuilt. That's what God is saying. Why? He says, for I, the Lord, have spoken, and it's going to happen. So remember, back to 3 to 6, God gave the overview of what was going to happen. 12 to 14 is the detail of it. And I already told you, when God says he's talking about all of these ones that's going to come, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and all of those are going to come against you. And then when he talks about they are going to lay your stones, all of the stones that was knocked down because of the battering that Nebuchadnezzar did, then Alexander the Great came through. He took those stones, and then where God says your soil, they're going to lay stones, timber, and soil in the midst of the water. This is making reference to the causeway that Alexander the Great built. So look at what God is saying is going to happen, and it doesn't happen in this case for another 200 years. Another 200 years. Don't tell me that God doesn't know what's going to happen. Why? Because God's in control. God's in charge. All we got to do is sit back and watch God. All we got to do is sit back and trust God. The people today, they're going to be gone tomorrow. We don't need to be worried about this one or that one. Why? Because God already knows what's going to happen to them. God already knows their future. God already knows when he's going to take their last breath from them. That's why we can trust God no matter who's in charge. Who's in charge? God's coming for you. And when we're going to find out in chapter 28 that not only does God come from the man, but he's going to come for the devil that's behind the man. Did you hear what I said? God knows what to do. That's why we can trust God. God says here, he says that I'm going to send Nebuchadnezzar like a hammer against you. He says he's going to come like a hammer. Hallelujah. And then when he finishes, the rest of them are going to put their nails in you. Don't play with our God. Don't mess with him. Did you hear what I said? So I already went through that detail of what they're going to do, what God said was going to happen. And so the last one that really brought the greatest destruction is Alexander the Great in 332 BC. So that happened almost a little less than 500 years later. because they were well, not 500, 200 years later. They were under siege all of that time. So God came against them the worst. He came against them the worst. It all the way went up to the 14th century, their punishment and everything. So that's what God is saying. I'm going to send a whole group against them. What's going to happen? Let's jump down here to section B, and then we'll be almost out of here. So now the final nail in the coffin. So what I wanted to do was just kind of piggyback a little bit about what I said about Tyre, because God really delayed the destruction of Tyre for many centuries, all the way up to the 14th century. And so again, we know from Matthew 15, Mark 7, Luke 6, that Jesus preached in those areas. He had a healing ministry in those areas. And of course, we certainly see the story of him delivering the daughter of the Syrophoenician woman who was from that area. So there's some history right there. So now we see the final nail in the coffin. So God says here, he says, will the coastlands not shake at the sound of your fall? When the wounded cry, when the slaughter is made in the midst of you, then all the princes of the sea will come down from their thrones, lay aside their robes, and take off their fancy clothes. They're going to clothe themselves with trembling. They're going to sit on the ground. They're going to shake in their boots. They're going to be astonished at you, and they're going to start crying. They're going to start singing a sad song to you. They're going to say, how in the world did you perish, O inhabitant? You were by the sea. You were safe. You were connected. You were renowned. You were strong. You were safe. You were secure. You were satisfied. You were great. You were glorious. You were strong. You were sturdy. You were strong in war. You were strong in battle. How in the world did you get messed up? How in the world did you fall? You had everything going for you. You were the greatest nation in the world. You and your inheritance, you caused everybody to be scared around you. Now we're scared because we see what's happening to you. He says, now the coastlands tremble on the day of your fall. Yes, the coastlands by the sea are troubled by your departure. We look to you. We thought you were great. We thought you were glorious. We thought you were the one that was secure. And they're saying, we're looking at you. We're shaking here. We're shaking in our boots. And so God is saying that Tyre is a warning for you. It's a horror. God, your day is coming. You should shake in your boots, because if I got the big bear, if I got the great big dog in the place, I'm coming for you. That's what God is saying. So God is saying you need to show humility. Good morning. Thank you for joining. If you're joining late, go back. We're looking at here. We're actually looking at Ezekiel 26 at the fall of Tyre. And it's very interesting that God shows us the fall of physical Tyre, because he's going to show us the fall of the devil behind Tyre when we get to 28. So he's saying you need to show some humility. You need to learn a lesson. You need to learn how to submit to God. I'm showing you what's happening out here. I'm showing you, you've seen what's happened to these other nations. And you didn't take up, you didn't follow me. You didn't do what I needed to do. I left the big bad dog. But he also wants us to know that the biggest bad dog is not destroyed, but God's on his way to destroy that one too. And we will see that next week when we look at chapters 29 to 32, because the biggest, baddest devil is Egypt. God is going to spend 4 whole chapters talking about the downfall of Egypt. So what's going to happen, God? We're looking, we're watching, we're paying attention, and we are praying. What's going to happen? Thus saith the Lord. He says, I'm going to make you a desolate city, like cities that are not inhabited. I'm going to bring the deep upon you. Great waters are going to cover you. When I bring you down to the sin, into the pit, to the people of old, I will make you dwell in the lowest part of the earth, in places desolate from time, and with those who go down to the pit, so that you may never be inhabited. And I shall establish glory in the land of the living. I will make you a terror, and you shall be no more, though you are sought for. you're not going to be found again. God is saying they're going to look for you and they're not going to find you. I'm going to bring you so low. You're going to be under the water. You're going to be a pit. And the only thing that's going to stand after you left is a little old rock that fishermen are going to lay their nets on to dry them out. God saying, I will bring you down. And so God says, you're coming down, you're going to drown, and you won't be found. Hallelujah. God says, you're coming down, you're going to drown, and you're not going to be found. Hallelujah. God is saying they're coming for you. There's no hope for you. You're going to be lost forever. So you're going to dwell in the lowest part of the earth. And I'm going to establish my glory in the land of the living. So this is a twofold prophecy here. He says, I'm going to make you dwell in the lowest part of the earth. And so this isn't speaking of geography here. This is speaking of the realm of the dead where the lost are judged. And then he says, I'm going to establish my glory in the land of the living. So once the judgment and the fall of the cities does not defeat God's plan, God is saying that my plan is advanced. I tell you right now, God is saying that I'm going to be glorified out of this. My agenda is the same. I'm going to establish my glory in the land of the living. And so we will see when we get to 33 and specifically 34, 35, where God begins to talk about rebuilding the temple and establishing worship again. So we will see that. We're excitedly looking at that because truth be told, I'm tired of this judgment stuff. So then he goes on to talk about he's going to make a terror of him. And so we will see this again. So of course, this commentator named Alexander says, you guys are excited out there. That's good. I'm glad that you guys are responding and acting to the word of God like this. And I'm sure that God is pleased too. So thank you for your emojis. Thank you for your emojis. So this commentator says here, he says that Tyre would never again exist and play an important role in history as she had in the past. Though some might look for her, she was never found. So then we'll see in 28, the spiritual side of what God is talking about. Basically, they're going to look for you and you're going to be gone. You wreaked havoc. You did a lot of things. You destroyed. You thought that you were big. You thought you were bad. You thought that you was a bag of chips and didn't need nothing else. That's what God is saying. They're going to look for you and you're going to be gone. So that ends that one. I'm not going to do 27. 27 is just an overview or a picture of Tyre. You can go ahead and read that if you want to. Again, we're going to do 28 on Monday. And I tell you, set your clock. Do whatever, put reminders on the wall, do whatever you got to do, but you cannot miss 28. Do not miss 28 no matter what you do. We're going to do that on Monday. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you for your prayers. It has really been rough doing this, but I thank you for your prayers. I feel the strength when I get up to do this. God bless you. God, we thank you for this word today. We thank you for your people, God. We thank you for the reminders, God, that we cannot sit back and watch other countries. We can't sit back and rejoice in what we see in other nations. We can't look down on other nations. We can't look down on the people in the other nations. We don't know when we might need these countries. We don't know when we might need the things, the resources that they have. Help us to not, as a country, not to look at other countries and other nations for what we can take, for what we can rob them for what we can steal for them. Help us to show compassion, God, and even in our own personal lives. Let us pray for one another. Let us have compassion, even in this time of calamity, even in this time of pestilence, God, when our nation is divided. Instead of us coming together as a nation, we're divided. Help us to be kind. Help us to be compassionate. Help us to show mercy. Help us to care about the people who are around us. Help us to be respectful even when we go out. Help us to do what we can, not just to protect ourselves, but to protect others, God. Help us as a country to be the kind of country and the kind of nation that you called us to be, God. We thank you for this time. We thank you for this hour, God. Let the words of our mouth, the meditation of our heart be acceptable in thy sight. Oh, Lord, you are our strength. You are a redeemer. Those of you who are committed to be gap dwellers, be on your face. Pray for our nation. Pray for our country. because who knows how God sees our country. We see it as great. We see it as glorious. We see it as secure. We see it as safe. We see it as standing. We see it as sturdy. We see it as invincible. We see it a certain way, but we don't know how God sees it. We got to pray. Did you hear what I said? We got to pray so that we can stay. Did you hear what I said? I thank God for you. God bless you. Show some emojis. Show God how blessed you are for the privilege of having this word every day, for the privilege of seeing how God feels, for the privilege of seeing the heart of God, for the privilege of seeing what we need to pray for. Did you hear what I said? We got to pray so that we can stay. Did you hear what I said? We got to pray so that we can stay. God bless you. Thank you all for joining. Have a great and wonderful weekend. Be safe out there. Be safe. Be respectful. Be kind. Be compassionate. Care about those that are you are amongst. Put your mask on. Put your gloves on. Be mindful of everybody. Be safe out there. God bless you. We will see you next time. We will see you next time. God bless. Give you a few times to send up the emojis because there's nothing like giving God glory because he's good and great. God bless.